Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War for PC, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. What you're seeing here is the PC version. This is a first-person shooter, the follow-up to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019, and the sixth installment in the Black Ops sub-series of Call of Duty. Although chronologically it takes place between Black Ops 1 and 2, so this really makes it more of a technical sequel to Black Ops 1. This whole series has just gotten to be completely messy at this point. But anyway, point is that it is the 2020 entry in the Call of Duty series, and it was generally pretty decently received when it released, although it did have a fair few problems. Now, I previously did a video on the multiplayer beta, and I really wasn't impressed with the game at all. So I really wasn't looking forward to this game the year it came out, but after a while it went on sale for a pretty decent price and I managed to pick it up for that. But I didn't really mess around with it at all. I left it sitting in my game library because the installation was about 150 gigabytes and I just didn't have that kind of space free at the time. Fast forward about a year and we get Call of Duty Vanguard, and I didn't even take a look at the beta for that. And I did eventually get a copy of that as well, again, on sale for a pretty decent price, and it sat in my game library as well, because even though it was only about 50 or 60 gigabytes, I wanted to go through Black Ops Cold War before I end up going through Vanguard. That, of course, brings us to now, when it is August of 2022, and the release of the rebooted Modern Warfare 2 is right around the corner, so I wanted to go ahead and get caught up before not only that, but also before I end up switching over to a new PC. So I went ahead and freed up some disk space and installed both Black Ops Cold War and Vanguard, and decided to just go ahead and blitz all the way through them. And as you might be able to tell from that video I made recently where I ranted about the Battle Pass system, this was a bit of a confusing process. I'll explain a bit more when I get to the gameplay portion of this video, but suffice to say there are a couple of major questions you need to ask with Black Ops Cold War, and the most notable of these is, how does this follow up Modern Warfare 2019? Because Modern Warfare 2019 was a much needed refresh for the series. Not only did it bring about a brand new engine that is considerably more capable than the one they were using previously, and is frankly just kind of a marvel. The thing ran ridiculously well, it looked really good, and where it counted, Modern Warfare 2019 was generally a pretty solid game all around. It was a much needed breath of fresh air for the franchise, so what did they do with that with the follow-up Black Ops Cold War? Well, let's just go ahead and start delving right into it and find out. And like always, we'll go ahead and start with the presentation, which was immediately a problem for Black Ops Cold War because it runs on an updated version of the Black Ops 3 engine, not the engine that Infinity Ward made for Modern Warfare 2019. So it's a less capable version of the engine that has been updated, and it doesn't always work out as well as you'd really hope. The game does run decently, but it certainly doesn't run as well as Modern Warfare 2019 did, and the only major new features of the engine compared to Black Ops 3 are really just the ray tracing and DLSS support. The end result with this, even though they certainly did make very good models, very good animations, very good textures, and all that sort of thing, unfortunately, the game just looks like an intermediary step between Black Ops 4 and Modern Warfare 2019. That's not to say that the game looks bad, but it's lacking a lot of the subtle touches that made Modern Warfare 2019's graphics look as good as they did, and it just gives off the impression that what you're playing isn't really a proper next-gen, in air quotes, Call of Duty like what we would expect after Modern Warfare 2019, but rather something that was carried over from the era before Modern Warfare 2019 and was just updated to be prettier. And the same kind of thing goes for the sound design as well. The gun and explosion sounds are decent enough, but they just lack that kind of punch that Modern Warfare 2019's had, so they're just not as satisfying. They do make up for this somewhat by the soundtrack being pretty solid, including some use of licensed tracks that are appropriate for the era that it was taking place in, which is the early 80s. And they do have very solid voice acting, which is admittedly fairly normal for this franchise by this point, but it's certainly worth mentioning. And when you bring all of the presentation together, you end up with something that definitely looks pretty good, and it sounds pretty decent for the most part, but it is still a bit disappointing after having played Modern Warfare and seen how much of a jump that was compared to its predecessor, Black Ops 4. Because going from Black Ops 4 to Modern Warfare 2019 felt like the series was really revitalizing itself and going into a brand new era with a brand new engine and all new possibilities. And then you look at Black Ops Cold War and it's using older tech that just doesn't work quite as well as the new tech does, and it's just, well, disappointing. But of course, what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and I want to go ahead and get something out of the way here first, and that is the Zombies mode. I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in the Zombies mode, so I barely played it. And what I played was pretty standard Call of Duty Zombies fare at this point. You have some objectives you need to complete while a bunch of zombie waves spawn in. You have to repair barriers to keep the zombies out. You kill zombies and repair barriers and such to get points that you can spend on getting weapons and weapon upgrades and perk kind of stuff. It's all very standard fare for the series at this point, and if you like the Zombies modes in previous Call of Duty games, you'll certainly like it in this one as well. I find zombies to be ridiculously boring in both the previous games and in general, and I certainly find it extremely boring here, so I really don't want to talk about it very much. I just wanted to go ahead and get that out of the way before I talk about the stuff I do care about, which are the campaign and the multiplayer. And I'm actually going to start with the multiplayer there, because there's actually not all that much to talk about there either. They've basically taken the systems from Modern Warfare 2019 and scaled them back a bit for Black Ops Cold War, but also made it mechanically a lot more like Black Ops 4. What do I mean by that? Well, the gunsmith mechanic from Modern Warfare 2019 makes a return where you can put a crap ton of attachments on your guns, and instead of having perks for your guns like in Modern Warfare 2019, they more or less just split that up into the various attachments, so you can't have sleight of hand to change the weapon animations. You now have to rely on stuff like fast mags. They did also set it up so that, like with Modern Warfare 2019, you can have up to 5 attachments on a gun, but if you use the Gunfighter wildcard, then you can bump that up to 8 in total. And that brings me to the point of they also brought back wildcards from previous Black Ops games into this one, which of course Modern Warfare 2019 did not have. Other than those changes to Gunsmith and the wildcards being brought back, everything else in the Create a Class system is going to be very familiar to you if you've played a previous Call of Duty game in the last few years. You have your tactical throwables, which are things like flashbangs or stun grenades. You have your lethal throwables, which are things like tomahawks or grenades. You have your 3 perk slots, which will give you various abilities like having higher resistance against explosives, or resistance against stun grenades, or being able to move silently, or not being picked up on the radar when you're moving around or playing the objective, or things like that. And you have your primary and secondary weapon slots, where you can set up your primary weapon to be assault rifles, sniper rifles, submachine guns, things like that, and your secondary weapon can be pistols, launchers, melee weapons, etc. Unless, of course, you mess around with the wild cards, which will give you various things like, of course, the attachments on the weapons, like I mentioned before, or giving you 1 extra of each perk slot, so you can have 2 perks in each slot as opposed to only 1, or being able to use whatever weapons you want in both the primary and secondary weapon slots and things like that. Field upgrades also return from Modern Warfare 2019, which are extra equipment items like field mics or trophy systems and such like that you can deploy somewhere on the battlefield for some benefit, and those are on a cooldown timer. And as you might expect, they made some slight tweaks here and there to try to balance things out a bit differently compared to the predecessor. But the biggest change with your loadouts compared to Modern Warfare 2019 is that they brought back score streaks from the Black Ops series instead of them just being kill streaks like they were in Modern Warfare 2019. So that was one of the big changes with Modern Warfare 2019 that I actually really didn't like, because I really liked the score streak system. It really encourages people to not just go for kills, and instead encourages them to play the objective. So they brought that back for Black Ops Cold War, and as you might expect, you do see people playing the objective a bit more in this than you did in Modern Warfare 2019. Of course, this is still a Call of Duty game, so there's only so much you can do to make people care about playing the objective in it, but at least the score streaks help to incentivize objective play compared to other Call of Duty games that use kill streaks, which only incentivize padding your KD ratios. Anyway, with the score streaks selection and the Create a Class system all being very familiar from previous Call of Duty games, and really just a carryover more or less from Modern Warfare 2019 with some slight tweaks here and there, What about the actual game modes? Was there anything new or exciting there? Well, not really. I mean, they put in the VIP escort mode, which I talked about briefly during the beta phase, and that selects one person on the sort of defending team as a VIP and gives them a specific loadout, and the rest of their team needs to get them to the extraction point, and the other team is, of course, trying to take them out. And it more or less plays like a somewhat jankier version of the VIP escort mode from Counter-Strike from way back when, which I actually don't even know if they still have that in Counter-Strike. I remember it being in 1.6, but I actually don't remember it even being in Source or CSGO, so it's not really so much a new mode as it is a really old mode that they're bringing into Black Ops Cold War. Only, of course, you're not going to see any gameplay footage of it in this video because I couldn't get into any matches of it. In fact, that was the main issue I was having with trying to mess around with any of the gameplay modes in Black Ops Cold War. You see, much like with Modern Warfare 2019, and frankly, all of the Call of Duty games in the series since, really, Modern Warfare 2, the entire game is built solely around matchmaking, so you are entirely at the mercy of what people are queuing up for. And in my particular case, the only modes I could reliably get into were Demolition and Team Deathmatch. So in case you were wondering why so much of this gameplay footage was of Team Deathmatch and Demolition, well, that's pretty much all I could get into. I got into a handful of matches of things that weren't those two modes. And even getting into those matches in the first place was a bit of a gamble, because sometimes it took several minutes for the matchmaking to find one of those. And of course, that's not to say that those modes are bad in and of themselves, but I mean, Team Deathmatch is one of the most standard modes you can put into a first-person shooter, and Demolition is basically just search and destroy with respawns. It's gonna get fairly dull fairly quickly if those are the only two modes that you're gonna be able to play throughout the entire experience. Obviously, when this game was still brand new, you could probably get into a lot more varied matches, but these days, you really can't. And I wanted to get into some Fireteam matches, which is the big mode that includes vehicles and such, but unfortunately, it never found a single game of Fireteam. I don't know if people just aren't playing them, or if the matchmaking hates me or what, but I just couldn't get into any Fireteam matches at all. So unfortunately, the selection of game modes I actually got to mess around with in the full version of Black Ops Cold War were just the kind of standard modes that have been in previous Call of Duty games. Obviously, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they're still in the game for a reason. People still play them because they're still good modes, and the core gameplay of Call of Duty multiplayer is still all very solid. It's that fast-paced adrenaline rush kind of gameplay that's very arcadey and very unrealistic, but it's just plain fun when you do play it. They did, however, mess one thing up that Modern Warfare 2019 was a welcome breath of fresh air with, and that is the map designs. Now, I know a lot of people complained a lot about the map designs in Modern Warfare 2019, but that is mostly because they had to learn the maps instead of just being on autopilot like you can be with this game. Because this game goes back to every single damn map being 3-lane garbage. You can go left, you can go right, or you can go center. That's it. For every map in the game. In fact, a lot of the maps are literally just copied and pasted from previous Call of Duty games. I know a lot of people bitched constantly about the maps in Modern Warfare 2019, but they required you to go back to your FPS basics and actually learn the maps again instead of just being on autopilot. Sure, not all the maps were good. I mean, we can all agree that Piccadilly was terrible. But having more varied map designs in Modern Warfare 2019 was a massive breath of fresh air. And then you get to Black Ops Cold War, and it's back to map designs that were already stale pretty close to a decade ago now that I'm making this video, but at the time Black Ops Cold War released, it was closer to half a decade ago. But still, point is that the map designs in Black Ops Cold War are quite stale, and thus they're quite boring. It's not necessarily that the maps themselves are bad, but they all just feel like an assembly line production rather than something people actually put time and effort into trying to figure out something interesting for. And of course, the return of a lot of maps from prior games in the Black Ops series really doesn't help that. It all just contributes to this feeling that while Black Ops Cold War's multiplayer gameplay is still definitely solid at its core, it just completely squanders that fresh momentum from Modern Warfare 2019 on something that is playing it really safe here. And the sad part is, while that makes the multiplayer just not all that interesting in the grand scheme of Call of Duty games, even though it can certainly be enjoyable, it makes their monetization scheme that much more egregious. You see, when I booted this game up into multiplayer and I started looking at the operators, I was seeing that there were only a handful of operators on each faction, which are NATO versus Warsaw Pact, that you can actually unlock by just playing the game. These are the ones that the game launched with, and they require you to complete various challenges in order to unlock them. When you do unlock them, you get exactly one skin for them. And if you want a different skin for that operator, you can't just play the game and complete challenges and such to unlock those skins. Instead, you have to purchase them extra, usually in a bundle and usually for a really weirdly high price for that sort of thing. And if you want any operators other than the ones the game shipped with, then you're going to have to purchase them extra as well. And of course, like with the base operators, if you want a different skin for the operators you have to purchase, that's an additional purchase price on top of that. Of course, this is all assuming that the cosmetics you're looking into purchasing are even available to purchase on their own. Again, most of these are, at best, included in bundles that include other things that you just don't care about. So you're basically having to waste money in order to get the things you actually are interested in. This carries over into the game's chief monetization scheme, which is the Battle Pass. This is a feature that is fairly common in the industry now, and it is an absolute plague. You see, the idea behind a Battle Pass, if you're not familiar with it, and if you are familiar with it, I don't care, I'm going to explain it anyway, is that each additional season comes with a new set of cosmetic unlocks. These are things like calling cards, emblems, weapon skins, operator skins, things like that you gradually unlock over time by playing the game and gradually leveling up your Battle Pass. The thing is, you have a free version, in massive air quotes, of the Battle Pass, and you have the paid version. The free version gives you a minuscule number of things, and very few of them are actually interesting or useful. They may be 100 COD points after grinding out 25 plus levels. It may be a calling card or an emblem. But if, say, you wanted a new operator or a new operator skin or a weapon skin or something like that, no, you don't get any of those things. You can only get those things if you pay for the Battle Pass. The thing is, even if you pay for the Battle Pass, you don't get all of those unlocks just right off the bat. You still have to grind out levels in the Battle Pass in order to unlock those things. And eventually, the season will end, so if you don't get all of the unlocks in the Battle Pass by the time the season has finished, then you just don't get those unlocks. Ever. So in other words, you're not paying for the things that you unlock in the Battle Pass. You are paying for the opportunity to unlock things in the Battle Pass. It neither respects your time nor your money and is just downright obnoxious, especially in a game you're already paying potentially full price for on launch day. Now, I do have to be somewhat fair here and say that all of the things you're going to unlock in the Battle Pass are purely cosmetic items. They don't affect the gameplay, and all of the new gameplay affecting stuff was just either put into the rotation in terms of the maps, or in the case of weapons, was given an unlock challenge to complete, but otherwise is available to everybody regardless of whether they have the Battle Pass or not. But when you look at the sheer amount of cosmetics that were locked behind a paywall, or even if they were available for free or in previous Battle Passes and thus you just can't get them anymore, it's incredibly obnoxious. But that's not even the worst part of Black Ops Cold War's Battle Pass system. I actually made a separate rant video on just this because it is just that ridiculous. But even if you're grinding out levels in the Battle Pass for Black Ops Cold War, it is an exercise in abject futility. Not because it's a ridiculously tedious grind or anything, but because there's absolutely no point in getting the Battle Pass in Black Ops Cold War anymore, because you don't get any unlocks for Black Ops Cold War. Nearly all of the unlocks in Black Ops Cold War's Battle Pass are not for Black Ops Cold War. They're for Warzone and Vanguard. So, you are playing Black Ops Cold War, but you're earning unlocks for games that you either don't own in the case of Vanguard, or probably don't care about in the case of Warzone. Let me reiterate that for those of you who may have just done a double take. The Battle Pass in Black Ops Cold War does not give you anything for Black Ops Cold War. It gives you unlocks for Warzone and Vanguard. You are earning unlocks for games other than the one you are actually playing. Which brings me to the very simple query. Why would anyone in their right mind pay for the Battle Pass in Black Ops Cold War, which you can still do, by the way, if the Battle Pass for Black Ops Cold War does not give you any actual benefit in Black Ops Cold War? It's the kind of thing that if somebody told you that, you just wouldn't believe them because it's too absurd, but I have the video footage here. You can see it yourself. It is ridiculous. And as it turns out, this also came with a weird side effect. You see, I was playing through Black Ops Cold War and getting the unlocks and unlocking attachments and things like that. And I was getting my level up, and I decided to go ahead and get Vanguard installed and give it a try and make sure all my settings were right and all that sort of thing. And I went into Vanguard and just started messing around with the multiplayer to just test some things out, because it's quicker and easier than going through single-player campaign and having to deal with cutscenes and all that. And I found out that my leveling progress from Black Ops Cold War had carried over into Vanguard. So I was starting Vanguard's multiplayer with pretty much all of the weapons and all of the perks and all that sort of thing unlocked. I had to unlock the weapon attachments and such still, because weapon leveling progress obviously didn't carry over. But it was just a really bizarre experience going into Vanguard's multiplayer and not having to start at level 1. It's probably a good thing I didn't have to start at level 1 because, well, I'll talk about that in the Vanguard video. But suffice it to say, the Call of Duty franchise's monetization scheme at this point is completely foobar, and so is the leveling progression, really. I have absolutely no idea if they're going to sort of reset everything when Modern Warfare 2 2022 comes out, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that. As it stands, the monetization scheme and leveling scheme between Black Ops Cold War and Vanguard just left me extremely confused. I mean, I know what they were trying to do with the monetization scheme. They were trying to force people into playing Warzone and Vanguard, but that's not something you can just force on your player base and expect good results out of. And in the case of giving, say, leveling progress going over to Vanguard, that's not really much of an incentive. So I'm really not sure what they were going for there, but the end result of all of that is that Black Ops Cold War's multiplayer is still fun in the sense that it's a solid enough Call of Duty multiplayer experience. It's just that it's becoming a ghost town even only 2 years after the game launched. And keep in mind, that's with crossplay enabled, so the vast majority of people I was actually playing with were on console, not on PC. So that really doesn't bode well, though to be fair, you can disable crossplay, so maybe people were just only playing with fellow console players or something, I don't know. But aside from that, they're clearly trying to push you into playing Warzone and Vanguard, even if you don't actually want to play either of those things. So you've got this really weird dichotomy between the gameplay itself being pretty solid, and everything else making it seem like they really don't want you playing the multiplayer, even if you do enjoy it. And this, of course, brings me to the only other thing left to discuss about Black Ops Cold War, because if the multiplayer basically doesn't want you playing it, then what about other modes? Well, I've already talked about how I don't care about zombies, so that leaves the single-player campaign, which, as I mentioned before, takes place between the events of Call of Duty Black Ops and Call of Duty Black Ops 2, and is set in 1981 with the Cold War potentially going hot once again thanks to the efforts of a Soviet operative named Perseus. And it's up to Russell Adler's Black Ops team to find whatever Perseus is up to and stop his plans, and hopefully take down Perseus himself. You take on the role of a member of Adler's team, codenamed Bell. And unlike in previous Call of Duty games where you were playing a fully set protagonist, in this one you can actually customize your protagonist somewhat. You can pick a first and last name, although it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, everybody just calls you Bell anyway. And you can also pick your background, your gender, as well as 2 character traits that correspond to single-player perks. These will give you things like reduced flinch or carrying extra ammo or things like that. Now sure, apart from the perks, it really doesn't have all that much of an effect on the gameplay, but it's your first sign that the campaign of Black Ops Cold War is trying something noticeably different from the other games in the series. And while they do start you off in a fairly typical linear thrill ride fashion, the game soon opens up a bit and gives you a couple of side missions you can go on, gives you the ability to talk to your teammates and learn more about them and where they come from and what they've been doing, as well as get their take on what's currently going on with the mission that you're all on to try to take down Perseus. And you can also wander around the safe house and inspect different things and maybe find additional clues or look at clues that you've already found and try to learn more about them, and go to the evidence board in order to take a look at all the evidence you've collected while out on missions and see how that relates to the overall search for Perseus, as well as look at evidence that you collect in missions as sort of collectibles and side content that actually has an effect on the side missions. You see, you'll get these various pieces of evidence as you're just wandering around and doing stuff in the main missions, and those will give you more information to work with on the side missions, which actually have you do some puzzle solving in order to try to figure out more about what's going on and get more favorable outcomes with the missions. And while that puzzle solving isn't especially complicated, the game doesn't hold your hand with that. It more or less expects you to figure all of that out on your own, and that is a much needed breath of fresh air compared to what we normally see from the AAA industry, which is that they basically treat the player like an absolute idiot and more or less solve the puzzles for them. Now, the unfortunate part about all of this is that there are only 2 side missions, and the evidence you need to get the most favorable outcomes with them are spread throughout all of the main missions, so it'll be a while before you're actually able to solve the puzzles completely, and thus be able to get those most favorable outcomes with those missions. You can, however, still go on the missions beforehand if you so choose, you just won't get those most favorable outcomes. And that's something that I really want to emphasize about the Black Ops Cold War campaign. It's that it actually does have a fair amount of choice in it. You're able to choose dialogue options. You're able to choose whether you want to, say, kill a particular enemy or capture them. You're able to choose the path on which you go in some of the missions. And while there are some missions that are entirely action and some missions that are more stealthy, there are also numerous instances where you're given options for how you want to tackle the situation. You can be stealthy, you can try to sneak past enemies and just leave them be, you can eliminate enemies in a quick and efficient manner, or you can just go in loud and get in the middle of a massive gunfight. And while there may only be some small differences in dialogue here and there depending on your choices for the character background, as well as the decisions you've made throughout the campaign, it still gives you more of a feeling of agency than you had in most of the previous Call of Duty games. In other words, because the choices you make have some impact on the way the game plays out, you feel like you actually matter to the story instead of just being along for the ride. Now, unfortunately, all of this is in service of a really just middling plot at absolute best. It does have some pretty well-written dialogue that is well acted, and it does have some twists and turns as you progress through the story, although in a lot of cases you can see those coming from a mile away. And they do throw in some callbacks to previous games, both in the Black Ops series and, funnily enough, even the Modern Warfare series. And sure, that's primarily in there as a bit of fan service, but they managed to implement it well enough to where it isn't just a bit of blatant fan service. It actually feels like it fits in with the setting and, to a somewhat lesser degree, the plot. Now, the game does have some different endings depending on some choices you make at the end of the game, and it does have some different epilogue content once you've finished all the main storyline depending on what you did with the side missions, but it's hard to escape the feeling that the campaign's a bit rushed. Depending on what you do with the side missions, if you even decide to go on them at all, and what difficulty you're playing on, you're looking at a roughly 4 to 6 hour campaign, which is pretty normal for a Call of Duty game, but when you have the element of player choice involved, it's really better to have something a bit longer so you can see more consequences of your actions. And with Black Ops Cold War going for more of an espionage thriller vibe, they actually would have benefited from having a bit longer of a story. Just pace things out a bit more smoothly instead of just abruptly having some transitions here and there, and making it fairly obvious that they had to rush the development of the game to meet the deadline. But given the global conditions that this was being developed under, and the shakeup in development teams and development times that happened as a result of some issues with Sledgehammer Games in particular, thus resulting in Activision forcing Treyarch to release their game early when it really could have used at least another year of development, it's actually pretty impressive the game turned out as well as it did, especially given that they were taking some risks with the single-player campaign. All that said, they did launch the game in a broken and unfinished state, and it was an absolute mess on launch. There is no denying that. But it's also worth noting that I didn't run into a single crash the entire time I was playing the game, and even on my i7-4790K, 16 gigs of RAM and GTX 1080, I didn't experience any significant performance problems or frame rate hitching or anything like that the entire time I was playing. It was a very smooth experience. You'll probably have noticed some of that in the gameplay footage that I've been showing throughout this video, but that's because of some weird issues with the bitrate and such that I was recording at. Hopefully I'll have that sorted out when I convert over to the new PC, so we'll figure that out when we get there. But suffice to say, they did turn the game around from its pretty disastrous launch and made something that works pretty well now. But that really doesn't excuse the fact that even though the single-player campaign in this is one of the better ones in Call of Duty history, unfortunately the game as a whole is just decent. It more or less balances itself out with the various positives it has, especially with the campaign, and the various negatives it has, especially with the multiplayer stuff. And you end up with this game that is solid enough if you like the Call of Duty gameplay experience, but it's not going to convert you over if you weren't already a fan of it. And that ultimately makes it a disappointing follow-up to Modern Warfare 2019. They finally had some forward momentum again, and they just didn't do much with that momentum with Black Ops Cold War, meaning that that momentum ended up being wasted and brought the series back to more or less just coasting along. Which is where Vanguard comes in, and that's a topic for another video that will hopefully be out later this week. But as for Black Ops Cold War, I'd say that if you're a fan of Call of Duty campaigns, then the campaign of Black Ops Cold War is definitely something you should take a look at. But if you're really only interested in the multiplayer, then you might as well just stick with Modern Warfare 2019. Overall, I give Black Ops Cold War a 3 out of 5. It's a decent game, maybe pick it up if it's on sale for a good price, but it was definitely not worth the full $60 they were asking for it on launch day. Thank you all very much for watching. If you like my videos, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. All the revenue from that goes directly back into the channel, whether it be getting more games for review, or replacing broken equipment, or getting new equipment, or whatever the case may be. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that is perfectly fine. I understand. But the option's there if you're interested. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in later videos.